The information presented in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for clinical mental health treatment. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please dial 988 or head to your nearest emergency room.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. We just wanted to let you all know that this is going to be our first two-part episode. So you all will get this week's episode, and then in 2 weeks, we'll follow up with the end of the segment. So it'll look a little bit different. We had a lot to say about this topic of anxiety. So we just wanted to give you all a disclaimer. Also, you will notice that my light shifts a little bit throughout the video, a whole lot of it actually. The sun was going down on me, but that's how long we were talking. That's how good the conversation was. So if anything, hopefully it'll give you some excitement to listen to this episode. And until then, we'll see ya. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Black People Die by Suicide 2 podcast, where we discuss all things mental health with an emphasis on suicide within the Black community. I am your co-host T-Kea.
And I'm your co-host, Jordan.
Welcome back, y'all. We excited to be here. So this is our second virtual recording. And it's so interesting. It's a little bit different with not being in the studio and being able to call on Leon, like, hey, Leon. But we're excited. If you are new here, welcome. We have been doing this podcast since May of last year, and I'm very proud of the progress that we have been making. We are also a nonprofit as well, and we've definitely been making waves and making a name for ourselves. So at the beginning of every episode, we do a wellness check to see how we're doing. But then we also said that now every episode moving forward, we're going to chime in our doctor, the esteemed Dr. Rheeda Walker, and we'll rate our psychological fortitude. So, Jordan, how are you? What emotions are you feeling? And what's your PF, which is short for psychological fortitude?
I'm a little bit stressed out, but it's okay. I'm glad that we're having the episode that we're having today because it'll give me a good opportunity to talk about it. So I'm a little bit stressed, but overall, I feel like I'm managing. I don't want to say okay, y'all. So just note for the new listeners. Good and okay are not emotions. So I'm not going to say that I feel good. I feel stressed, but I'm grateful that I'm trying to work through that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as the episode goes on. For my psychological fortitude, man, I think I'm at a good, I'll say a good 7. It could definitely be worse. A good 7. And we'll get into a little bit more about that. T-Kea, how are you feeling today?
Oh my gosh, you said 7. I was like, she's going to say 6.
It's probably more like a 6, to be honest.
No, 7 is good. Don't let me rain on your parade. I was just thinking she's probably going to say about a 6. But for people who are new, Jordan, can you explain to them what psychological fortitude is?
Yeah, so psychological fortitude, this concept from the esteemed Dr. Rheeda Walker. We had her on a previous episode. So if you all want to check that out, go back and search through our episodes that we recorded and you'll find it. Psychological
or
fortitude.
We'll just put it in the show notes for y'all.
Yes.
We can put it in the show
I'll
notes.
stick it in the show notes as well. So psychological fortitude is your ability to sort of bounce back from the stressors of everyday life because, stress, it's a normal part of usually everyone's daily routine. There's never enough time. You might be stressed out about things at work. It's not necessarily that stress is a bad thing, but a matter of how well you're able to bounce back when things do occur. So your psychological fortitude is basically a measure of how well you are doing emotionally, physically, how well you're doing overall. So it's rated from 0 to 10, with 0 being, man, this is not going well, and 10 being, I'm functioning at my highest self right now. So that's what psychological fortitude is.
Yes, I always have Jordan to explain it just because I feel like she does a better job than I would do it. So, how am I doing? I am feeling, gosh, what's the word I want to use? I'm going to say proud, excited, and hopeful. Those are the
Those are good
words that
words.
I have to add at peace too. And the reason why I use peace is because it doesn't mean everything in my life is going right, but it just means that I have peace because I believe that things are going to work out for me how they are supposed to work out. So I guess I've been tapping into my spirituality lately because I'm like, the scripture that speaks about like God will give you a peace that surpasses all understanding. Because when I look at like I am still, Lord, working through grief, but outside of that, it's just like I was like, I'm not gonna let work, I'm not gonna let people, I'm not gonna let money, I'm not gonna let anything, at least right now. Now we can't say how we're gonna be tomorrow or the next day, but at least for the past week, I just been at peace. I said, despite what's going on around me, things that may not be going right, like I'm still just gonna sit in a place of peace and say that everything will work out for me. In my favor. I just believe that. So that is kind of where I'm at. And then I think just hopeful because I've been, being presented with a lot of opportunities. And I think excited because Black people died by suicide too was like really, really taking off and like just making we making some waves. And I'm excited about where the organization is going.
Those are absolutely beautiful. You know what? I think that what you mentioned is a perfect segue into today's topic, because it sounds like you have a pretty good strategy for managing what we're going to talk about today. So, for today's episode, we are discussing one of the most common mental health struggles. Y'all, I am in the thick of it right now, and that is anxiety. Um, Anxiety is very nuanced. There's normal everyday anxiety that we all kind of experience. Maybe you're running a little bit late for work. Maybe something at work is stressing you out. You have to pick up the kids. You have to cook. You have to, you know, anxiety is part of everyday life, but it's sort of, when does anxiety go from sort of quote unquote normal to a an issue that would affect your mental health? So, per the American Psychological Association, anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, physical changes, like your blood pressure, maybe your heart beats racing, you might feel butterflies, things like that. But again, anxiety isn't necessarily all bad, but it can certainly present itself to the point where it's sort of debilitating or affecting you on your day to day life. So we're going to talk about anxiety today. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to the intro, T-Kea, but this is a good one. This is where I'm at right now, and it's stressful. It's very stressful. We'll get into a little bit more about what's going on with me as we talk about this, but just wanted to see if T-Kea had any additional things she wanted to add at the time.
No, as you were talking, I said, "Oh, I forgot to say my PF."
Oh, you sure did. Well, you know what? That's okay. You can say it now.
Yes, my PF. I am going to give it. I think I'm going to give myself an 8 for PF.
Okay. Okay.
I
Yes.
think that's yes. I am going to So that's where I am. As it relates to anxiety, it's so interesting because before I was in this place mentally, I'm gonna say maybe about 2 to 3 weeks ago, anxiety was definitely on 1,000. 1,000. What, like, it was just extremely high. So I'm glad that we're going to talk about this because it's something that we all can relate to. And I think it's also important to note that while we all experience anxiety, that doesn't necessarily mean you have an anxiety disorder. And, we're not in here, we're not out here to diagnose anybody. We just want to educate you all on what anxiety is. And if it gets to the point where it starts causing you significant impairment in your daily life, then I think that's when it's time to see a mental health provider. But
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to maybe add that. But I'm excited about this topic because it is something that we all can relate to, we don't, maybe we could talk a little bit about it once we kind of get into it, but I
Mm-hmm.
would love for you to talk about too, Jordan, like good anxiety as well, because I feel like anxiety gets a bad rep sometimes when
Yes. Agreed.
it's not all bad. So yeah, that's the only 2 cents I'll add.
Yes. So that's an excellent segue, actually, because anxiety isn't all bad for real. Like, you'll have anxiety, like maybe you're excited because you have a big performance or you have a job interview or something that's positive happening in your life. It's, you know, it's common that you'll have some butterflies, maybe some jitters, and that's sort of positive anxiety as opposed to um anxiety that's associated with disorders like PTSD or even just day-to-day things. Again, maybe you're running late for work, maybe you're stuck in traffic. That's extremely stressful. We live in the DMV, and listen, that morning commute is brutal. It's gotten a little bit better since COVID, but before COVID, you'd be stuck in traffic for a good hours, depending on where you're going. So that's stressful. Of course, bills and those type of things can also be stressful as well. If you have a little bit more month in your money, stress, right? But stress isn't always something that is negative. And it is something that is normal. And the National Institute of Mental Health talked about when anxiety sort of turns into an anxiety disorder. So, anxiety disorders involve more than just temporary worry or fear. For people with an anxiety disorder, the anxiety does not go away and can get worse over time. And the symptoms begin to interfere with your daily activities, like your job, your schoolwork, your relationships, being able to sort of care for yourself and manage your day to day life. And that's when anxiety becomes an issue.
Yes, so I think this is a perfect time to even talk about our experiences with anxiety. So maybe, I
Mm.
don't know if we want to maybe dive into the different types of anxiety disorders and then we share our diagnosis and our experiences with it. Maybe that's what we want to do.
Yes,
Um,
that's good.
okay, cool. So I guess I can got my little notes over here. But as far as the different types of anxiety disorders, there's generalized anxiety disorder where people have like ongoing worry that just never goes away, like worrying literally about everything, every worst scenario, literally from the time you get up, probably from the time you go to bed, you just people say worry wart, like a lot of time that yes. And so if you're constantly finding that you're always worried, like I said, I'm always going to refer to a mental health professional, but that's generally people who experience generalized anxiety disorder. And then of course we have panic disorder where people have panic attacks, and I think people are familiar with those as well, and they can be very scary because panic attacks mimic or mirror heart attacks.
Mm-hmm.
People start experiencing some of those same symptoms, so it can be really scary for people, especially if it's the first one that they've ever experienced and they're not sure. People feel like they are really going to die. um and so they're very sporadic. People sometimes don't even know when they're going to come on, and people do get really scared. So I think that's even something to speak to as well. And then of course separation anxiety, I think a lot of people kind of know about. I hear people joke all the time saying like how their dogs have separation anxiety. But of course, and I think it's interesting that we're talking about to even talk about separation anxiety. But I feel like that would just that alone, I would be interested in bringing a mental health professional to talk about that, like going into depth about that. Um, so yeah, I know, like, of course, in terms of like the general definition of separation anxiety, but I would be really interested in seeing like how that shows up for certain people. I know when my little sister, she's 16 now, but when she was a toddler, she had terrible separation anxiety from me. Like, I it was like, I wish I could have recorded it. Like, it was so bad. Like, she literally could not be separated from me, and falling out on the floor, running after me if I was leaving. I just would be like, Mom, just let her come, because this is so. But yeah, people who have like intense fear of not being with a particular person, and how it just causes a lot of just anxiety, fear. So I think about, especially, I know a lot of times like younger kids struggle with it, but I'm not going to say, I'm pretty sure there are tons of adults who struggle with separation anxiety. And then, of course, OCD, which we're going to have to bring another professional in to talk about OCD. I'm going to just put this disclaimer here. We don't use stigmatizing words here. So, especially people like, that's my OCD. Some of y'all be saying that's my OCD, and y'all don't even have OCD. Y'all just use that to describe that, like, maybe you're a neat freak or you like things a certain way. As my mom calls me, anal. I do like things a certain way, but I don't have OCD. Like, OCD is a disorder. And I feel like that contributes to the stigma when people say like, that's just my OCD, when they just mean they like things a particular way. They like things clean. Doesn't mean you have OCD. And then, of course, PTSD. I think a lot of people know about post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're going to get into that. Out of those diagnoses that we mentioned, Jordan and I have experience with between both of us, I guess, two. So we'll talk about that. So, Jordan, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your diagnosis. Maybe when did you get your diagnosis, and what was it like in the very beginning when you started experiencing those symptoms, and what symptoms were you experiencing?
Yes, so I have a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder and post traumatic stress disorder. I was first diagnosed with both in 2012. This was at the time when I was originally hospitalized, which, for those of you who don't know, the very first time I was hospitalized, it was on an involuntary basis. So I was taken to the hospital in the back of a squad car because my mental health professionals thought I was a threat to myself and it wasn't safe for me to go home. So that was my introduction into the world of mental health, I suppose. But that's what I ended up being diagnosed with. And generalized anxiety disorder, this is something that I still struggle with pretty much at all times. I am definitely, as T-Kea mentioned earlier, a worrywart. And I don't know, I started noticing it because it was really, really hard for me to focus, like the very last, I would say like the last 2 years of undergrad. I would read things, but I wouldn't comprehend it. And I remember there was a point where I could read the same page for like an hour, just one page. And I would read it over and over and over again, but I could not retain the information. So that was one of the first things that I noticed, like a complete lack of focus and inability to really take information in. I just felt like I was very overstimulated. Um, for PTSD, I noticed something was wrong probably about the same time. So I would say like maybe my third year of undergrad. And I remember I got to the point where everything just kind of felt threatening. So I couldn't have anyone sit behind me if I was in lecture because I had to sit in corners so I could see every possible threat that was coming my way. That was probably one of the first signs that I noticed that something was a little bit off, because I did not do that my first 2 years of undergrad. And then the worst part for me with PTSD is definitely the flashbacks. So you'll have like these intrusive thoughts. Typically they can be of whatever your past traumatic event was, and they can be triggered by pretty much anything. Um, sights, scent, going past a location where something happened, engaging in the same activity where something happened. So for a lot of folks, for example, who have been in car accidents, maybe the idea of being behind the wheel would trigger someone's PTSD. Um, and then for me, the most powerful, I suppose, symptom that I have for PTSD is the vivid dreams. And they're very, very hard to sleep. That's usually like the sign where I knew that I needed to be hospitalized. When I started having these dreams that would they were just horrifying. Some of them wouldn't make sense. Some of them were of past traumatic events. A lot of my dreams, I would see like my father. So that was a lot of how my anxiety would manifest itself in those two disorders. I've never been diagnosed with OCD, but I did have compulsive tendencies. And not that long before I went to the hospital, um, I just had this thing. I developed this habit with checking my door to my apartment to make sure that it was locked, and checking the stove. And it got so bad. My heart goes out to people that have a diagnosis of OCD, because there was a night where I had to keep checking my front door to make sure it was locked. I remember I probably got out of that bed maybe 10, 15 times to check the door, and I could not rest until I rechecked and checked and checked again and checked again. It was so distressing. I remember I busted into tears at one point from me checking the door, because it just felt so stressful. Like, if I don't make sure that this door is locked, something horrible is going to happen to me. And maybe that was a little bit of PTSD too, but anxiety definitely has had and continues to have a very significant impact on my life. And unfortunately for me, like, I don't have that anxiety that bolsters people to get stuff done. I have the type of anxiety that's very I guess crippling or disabling in a way, because I tend to just shut down. If it's something that needs to be done, I'll just put it off, put it off, put it off. And I absolutely hate that. But that's just the way my anxiety manifests itself. So I'm trying to currently work through that now. It's just, anxiety's been kicking my butt for a long time, since at least 2010. And yeah, my heart goes out to everyone who's struggling with anxiety, whether or not you have a diagnosis. Um, I guess, T-Kea, if you want to talk about your diagnosis and how it affects you.
Yes.
I know I said a lot.
No, as you were talking, I was listening, and one of the things that resonated with me was when you talked about how you read something and be like, what did I just read? I just keep reading the same 4 words or the first sentence, and it's just not it's not doing what it's supposed to do cognitively.
Yes.
It's not clicking.
Yes.
So that was something that I experienced as well. But I'm trying to think back as to when I'm pretty sure I've been struggling with anxiety since I was a child, but I don't think I knew, obviously, just didn't know what I know now. So I think some of my anxiety is rooted in, not I think, I know some of it is rooted in trauma. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been vocal on the podcast before about this, but I'm not sure. But I did watch my mom be verbally and physically abused growing up. So that has given me a lot of anxiety. And even to this day, I am easily startled because as a child, I never really knew when a fight was going to break out.
Mm-hmm.
So when they would start yelling or they would start like fight, it's just I never really knew. So I always felt like I was had to walk on eggshells, or I was just always fearful. I don't even know if I felt like I had to walk on eggshells. I just think I was just always fearful. And because of things often happening, if I could be like in the room or coming in the house or something, and a fight is happening or is about to break out, like I was always startled. So like easily like I guess frazzled. And even like now, Jordan could be at my house. Like I could be in the bathroom and Jordan has a key or the door's open and I'm like, oh, just come in. In my mind, I know when I get out the bathroom, I know Jordan's going to be sitting on the couch. Like I know that, but even still, I still just jump. Like I'm a very jumpy person, um, just all the time, and that is a lot how anxiety shows up for me. I guess specifically, my diagnosis is generalized anxiety disorder,
Mm-hmm.
and also it's interesting because my anxiety has the opposite effect that it has on Jordan. So, in terms of getting things done. Now, naturally, my personality, like everyone knows, I'm super goal oriented. I'm ambitious. Just, it's, I don't know if it's a New York, New Jersey hustle mentality. Like, that's just kind of how I naturally am. But I feel like it's even heightened because of anxiety. And then it's probably even double heightened because of hypomania.
Mm-hmm.
So, I so it's just like all I tend to get a lot done, but I find that I still feel very stressed and I'm still very overwhelmed, and and my anxiety shows up in the sense that because I'm high achieving, I feel like I sometimes feel like I have to do it all now. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I don't do it all right now, I don't think the world is going to cave, but maybe something subconsciously maybe thinks, because psych consciously I don't think that, but it may be something something to explore with Dr. T. But I think maybe subconsciously it's just like if you don't get this all done right now, like it's all the world is going to come crashing down. Now I remember one time in therapy I was talking to Dr. T, and she's like, "What's going to happen if you don't respond to the email, or what's going to happen if you don't get that thing done?" And I'm like, nothing. And she's like, yeah, nothing. Nothing's gonna happen. But for me, it's like I'm revved up, like I gotta do what I gotta, and part of that is not just the witnessing domestic violence, but also watching, my mom struggle at some point with like just struggling financially. So at one point, like I remember as a child, like having like the lights or the water cut off, or maybe both. Um, and so some of my anxiety festers in a way that, because, and I'm like, dang, I don't have to get emotional, but it's like you don't feel safe. So like I think baby Kia is what I call. I should go get the picture so y'all can see her sitting in the tub naked. No, I'm not gonna do that, but got that picture over there. But baby Kia is like, oh my gosh, like, you don't want your lights cut off, you don't want your water cut off. And so naturally, part of my anxiety and also my motivation is because I don't want that struggle, because I watched it. So that's why I'm highly ambitious, because I don't want to ever have to experience that again. So I'm like, I have to. Jordan will tell you, I do. I legit work like 60 hours a week. That's why sometimes we'll talk about self care later, but I do have to make sure that I'm conscious of it, because I do realize that it's like a double edged sword for me. Sometimes I have to check in and say, like, where's this coming from? Like, are you in a hypomanic state? Is this anxiety? Or is this just Kia just being highly ambitious? And sometimes it's hard because it's like a melting pot of all of it. And I have to really sit and check in with myself to see what's driving my behavior. What thoughts am I experiencing? And typically, it all not typically. There are many times where it has to do with feeling like my safety is threatened. Like, but by safety I mean like Maslow hierarchy of needs. And I maybe we should probably pull them up because I'm blanking on them. But like one of them is just like your home, like just having a stable place. That can give anybody anxiety if you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, how you're going to pay your bills, um if you have accumulated a lot of debt, like just any financial stress or any something that threatens your livelihood. And I have not, since I have, at one point I was not able to live on my own because my mental health was so bad. Around the time that me and you met, Jordan, I was just transitioning back on my feet again because was living with family and friends at one point because I did have to give up my apartment. Around the time that we met, I was just leaving from staying with a friend for a few years, and I had moved into a townhouse and I had two roommates. And I think that was around the time we first met. And I was like, "Whoo, I don't know if I'm ready to live just on my own yet again," because I was still dealing with the fact that I had to give up my previous apartment when I was living on my own. I say that to say, now that I no longer have roommates, and I've been in this current apartment for almost 4 years, and I've been on my own. Not once in 4 years did my rent not get paid. Not once did I have to worry about my water, or like I didn't have to. And even if there were rough financial patches in the 4 years, because there has been, people in my support system came to support me. Like my grandmother, I remember at one point she's like, "Don't worry, I got you." My grandmother covered my rent, 1 month. I think that was like the only time I really had to worry, maybe one time. And it might have been right after, maybe like a few months after I was laid off from that job. But I say all of this to say, because I feel like I've been talking a long time, that a lot of my anxiety is often rooted in, I don't know if it's a subconscious thing, like if I don't have a family home to go back to, like my mom, which I would be interested in bringing her on the show to share some of her story. But needless to say, the childhood home that I grew up in, like we don't have that home anymore. So like my mom lost the home. So sometimes my anxiety is, if I'm always thinking like, oh my God, if I can't live on my own, then I think that's where the hustle mentality comes in. Cause it's like, I don't really have a safety net. Like opposed to before, if something happened, I just go back to my family home. But because my mom only has a small apartment and my siblings are still there, and it's already too many people for that apartment. So, and I know that like my mom's in a space now where she's looking to buy a home, and she's looking, because I don't want to get too much into her story, but she really did come out of an abusive relationship, and she's rebuilding from that time, because she's only been out of that relationship, I think, for maybe 5 years, and she's still rebuilding from that. But I say that to say that's part of where it's just like this, I have no choice but to figure it out. So that anxiety kind of pushes me to be like, if you don't catch no fish, you're not going to eat. So I got to get out here and work. I got to get out here and hustle no matter what. And so that's where I feel like sometimes it makes my anxiety so high to the point where like I can work for hours on end, but then I have to tell myself, T-Kea, you know, take a break. And part of that is too, like I mentioned, like I am very passionate about the work that I do. I literally love what I get to do. So that makes it even easier to just keep working. So yeah, I feel like that's a lot how my anxiety often shows up, is just that fear of, am I going to be homeless? Or, and I don't know if that's what, I don't think I tell myself that consciously. I've never said like you're going to be homeless, but I feel like the behaviors, maybe it's a subconscious thing. So
Yeah,
I said I'll let
it's
it off. It's
no, this is
therapy.
great. It's so interesting how like the same issue of anxiety affects everyone so differently. And of course, a lot of that does have to do with, our experiences growing up, what home life was like for us as children. I think my anxiety, a lot of it's rooted in the need to feel safe because home didn't always necessarily feel
Hmm.
safe for me. And to be completely transparent with you, you guys, I'm at my parents' house. My mom, she still has the house that my brother and I grew up in. For those of you who don't know, my father passed away back in 2008, but I'm still here in my family home, which I am very, very blessed and fortunate to be here. I'm sure my mother it will be so glad the day I bounce up out of her crib. But yeah, I'm lucky that I do have this safety net to sort of get on my feet, because it makes me sad. And I'm not crying this episode, y'all. I'm not gonna do it, but it does make
It's
me
okay.
sad
We
because
welcome tears.
I think about like my life prior to anxiety sort of creeping up on me or developing. I don't know. It seemed like it came out of nowhere. But of course, with my childhood experiences, it makes sense that I would end up developing some mental health issues, especially because there's some things like depression that run on my father's side. So I have both the situational background and the genetic background that it was probably going to happen to me anyway. But it still felt like it came out of nowhere. And um yeah, I need to feel safe. And I don't know. I feel like my parents' house, as much as I want to move out of here, it it feels safe, which is so strange because it didn't always feel that way. I don't know if I feel that way now because my father is gone. So like there's no discord or just infighting here anymore, but I don't know. It makes me sad because I think about how I was prior to my depression. And I think for anyone who knew me prior to, I'm going to say like 2014 on back, I'm like, my anxiety has been so bad. I'm like a completely different person now. Um, I would say almost in a lot of ways like a shell of myself because I was a lot more like T-Kea. I was never like more on the type A side, but I was definitely on
Is
the
that shade? So,
no, 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 no. Because
no,
I
no, no,
mean,
I'm not. I'm just messing with you. I am very type A, and Jordan knows that. It's just a joke. I'm just kidding. But I am type A.
there are A and B people, right? Like, so even though I don't have the same sort of personality type as her, I was always somebody who was doing something, involved in something. I was always looking for opportunities to better myself in school and in activities and clubs, and always made honor roll and volunteering. And I was all over the place and I was good. But ever since I started to experience this anxiety, because it has the opposite effect that it has on T-Kea for me, where I'm just completely shut down, I'm like, dang, I really feel like I sort of lost my leg up in life because things, put it to you this way, anyone who knew me as a kid, especially like my teachers or my classmates, if they could see me now, they would be shocked because I'm a completely different person. That you would have thought I was the person who was going to go out here and just be successful and killing it. And all that has not, full transparency, has not happened for me. And a lot of that has been, I guess, the impact of my mental health or my ability to function. And the anxiety is definitely one of those things. So yeah, I guess we should talk about the signs of anxiety.
Wait.
Yes.
Yes, we definitely, it would be helpful.
It would be
But
helpful. Yes, I'm sorry.
it would be, but I wanted to ask you a question about that because
Yes.
my antennas went up. It said beep beep beep. Is it time to do some reframing? But
Probably.
you said something that really that hit me. You said, I thought I would be this person where I'd be this super successful person and out here.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to know, what is your definition of success and what does success look like for you? Because I know it's
Yeah.
relative. It looks different.
Yes.
So I just want to know that, because do you not see yourself as successful?
Now, disclaimer, because I do feel like people see me in a way that I don't see myself. And I think the way in which other people see me probably more accurately reflects than what I see myself, because I tend to have a lot of negative self-talk that I need to work through, but it doesn't feel successful to me, because y'all, I just knew I had my life all planned out. Like, I was going to graduate from undergrad at 22. I was going to get me a fire job, whatever that means, by the time I was 23, and I was going to buy a house at 25, and things were just going to keep going up from there. And none of that panned out. And it's so painful for me to think about, but I'm also able to give myself grace, because I wasn't well. I don't know how, I mean, I really was not well. And I'm talking to my therapist about this currently, because she's like, why are you being so hard on yourself? Like, you do realize that you had this significant issue. I was hospitalized 4 times in my 20s. Obviously, things were not going well. And I don't know. I really wish my life could have turned out so much differently. But at the same time, I just have to keep reminding myself, Jordan, it's okay. You weren't well. So I try to give myself grace. If that makes any sense. I feel like I'm just rambling. But if that makes any sense, I don't know if anybody else has experienced this.
No, it does make sense, but it made me think about a bigger issue. And you let me know if you've thought this too. I feel like as millennials, we were also fed this very jaded view of which I feel like contributes to a lot of our anxiety, and why a lot of millennials and especially Gen Z like get somebody else to do it. Mm-hmm. But we were fed this idea that all we had to do was graduate high school, go to college, we would get the white picket fence, the great job. Like, we just felt like going to college would solve all of our problems, where that was not necessarily the case. One is, especially if you grew up low income like me, was who's paying for this like, who's paying for this?
Yep.
Which is a whole nother podcast issue about student loans, etc. But I just feel like we were fed this American dream, and now that millennials we're in our mid 30s to like early 40s, are millennials, we are figuring out that what the messaging and what we were presented, or the future that we told we would have, is not that. And because I also was of the mind that when I graduated college, like, when the time I'm 25, I'm going to do this. And when I do this, like, girl, you had a suicide attempt at 25.
Right, exactly.
that was not a part of the plan. So it's just, when you said that, it just kind of made me think about some of the anxiety that's rooted in the trauma and life experiences that you've had. But it also made me think about the other part of the messaging that we were fed as children.
Yes.
And I feel like now that I'm in my 30s, I'm like, that was that was a lie. Because I think for previous generations, that worked for them. Like I have a great
Mhm.
uncle. He went to college, and he was able to easily pay off his student loans, six-figure job. Like but I just feel like he grew up in a different time,
Mhm.
and it's very different now. And I feel like in my 20s I dealt with a lot of that anxiety because I was feeling like, that's why another reason in my 20s I couldn't be on social media in my
Mhm.
early 20s to mid 20s, because I used to always feel like I was behind my peers. It
Mhm.
social media anxiety is real too. That's another episode. But it's like I always felt like, oh, this person just got married. This person just is about to have a baby, even though I don't want kids. But the point that I'm saying is, it
Mhm.
seemed like from the outside looking in that people's lives were moving forward. Meanwhile, I was struggling to just stay alive.
Right.
And that was some of my anxiety too. But now I don't, while I do give myself deadlines, because I am a deadline person, okay? I will tell you, I
Mhm.
got my little notebook over there, y'all. I'm not gonna even pull it up because it might give y'all anxiety, okay? Um, but I try to, like, not even try to, while I do give myself deadlines for certain things, but it's not unrealistic deadlines to the point where it's like, oh, by the time I'm 35, I got to do this. By the time because I'll be 34 this year. So it's like, but I
Mhm.
don't really have the the pressure to like do certain things by a certain time. It's more so like task. Like if we're working on a project or something, like we're
Right.
planning this tour, it's like work related stuff. But as far as like, do I have goals? Yes, I do have a goal to, I guess I could share this on the podcast because I've never talked about it publicly yet. Um, and I said I was going to talk about it on social media too, but I don't know when. So y'all get the scoop right now. But needless to say, so we had mentioned a few episodes back that I had applied to PhD programs. Now, I heard back like 2 weeks ago, the two programs that I did apply to, I did not get into them. And the first rejection I got, it stung a little bit. Um, and I'm bringing this up to say that, like, for instance, in my bathroom right now, I have Dr. Blackman Loden. I had to rewrite it either way because I at first I was like Dr. Blackman Loden. So then I went back after I processed everything, and I realized it had nothing to do with me. Like I didn't take it as an attack on my ability to perform well or my talents or my gift. Like it wasn't that. I just think that for the requirements that the program wanted, and all PhD programs are different, they just wanted me to have a master's in public health, which I didn't. My master's is in PR and communications. And so I was like, okay, this just means that maybe this is not the program for me, because there are other PhD programs that don't require me to have a master's in public health. So say that to say I wrote on my, what do you call it, my mirror, and I wrote Dr. Blackman Loading, and then under it I wrote acceptance 2025. It's like when I'm going to get my acceptance. Now that is just me more so. It's not pressure. That is just me, I guess, like trying to speak things into existence, or when you talk about manifestation, that's what that is. It's not like, oh my gosh, like my world's gonna come crumbling down, if it doesn't happen in 2025. But I have faith that it will, just because of the experience that I had, and knowing what to look for in certain programs, and I'm doing research and talking to different programs and things like that right now. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that just means I have to look for programs with certain requirements. So it was just a learning curve. But I say all that to say I don't put as much pressure on myself as it feels like we used to do in our 20s, like by like the little timeline things, not so much, because that just gives too much anxiety. But Jordan, I'll let you talk about the signs of anxiety because I've been talking too much, y'all.
So the signs of anxiety. Anxiety has both has psychosomatic symptoms. So these are things that affect your mind and your body. So it's trouble concentrating or making decisions. As I said, I was reading that page over and over and over again and not retaining anything. Huge problem for me. Feeling irritable, tense, or restless, experiencing nausea or abdominal distress, having heart palpitations, sweating, trembling, or shaking, trouble sleeping, or having a sense of impending danger, panic, or doom. These are some of the symptoms of anxiety. Butterflies in your stomach,
Jordan,
things like that. Yes, ma'am.
as you were talking, it made me think about we both because we both talked about it was one of those symptoms. I'm trying to look on the list over here to see there was something that me and you both. Oh, because remember I was talking. I think one time we both talked about having a sense of impending. I can't even get the word
Mm-hmm.
out. Having a sense of danger or like
Yes.
something bad is going to happen or
Mm-hmm.
like always predicting the worst, like literally just your
Yes.
mind just automatically goes left field, like making up scenarios in your head, stuff that just never might happen. And then in therapy it's like you do the work of, okay, so if the worst thing does happen, then what will happen, like then what will happen to you, like you kind of go through that
Right.
versus worrying about it. It's just like processing that. But it made me think about that. For me, I am also, when you talk about like those somatic symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
deal with stomach. We already know a whole bunch of gastrointestinal issues. That's another story. But I and I remember I had a situation in Jordan. No, I was dealing with some stuff as relates to our organization, and just like interacting with like a certain person was giving me anxiety, and like my stomach was lit, like you just feel sick. I was like
Mm-hmm.
you can't eat. You want to avoid the thing that's giving you anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
but I had to actually push through it. So I had to push through it by having a difficult conversation with the person, being able to state how things make me feel,
Mm-hmm.
being able to just express myself and push through that. Because the old Kia would have been like bouncing, like she not. But because of therapy, I've been able to advocate for myself more now than I have ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, those for me, it's also the stomach thing. Depending on, I feel like I am sick.
Yeah, I feel like even now, the most prominent symptom that I tend to experience is the trouble concentrating and making decisions, along with having a sense of impending danger or feeling like something is coming down the pike that is going to stress me out. I think those are probably the two that are the most prominent for me. And some of my symptoms are a little bit different with PTSD because that's a whole nother set of symptoms. A lot of the disorders that we talked about that sort of fall into the category of anxiety have different signs as well. But I think the trouble concentrating is probably the most prominent one, and it is rough when you're trying to get stuff done. Um, I guess we should get into T-Kea. Is there anything
I
that
was gonna.
triggers your anxiety?
That's a really good question, Jordan. Because I feel like it would be helpful if I knew. I feel. Oh yes, I feel like what triggers my anxiety. I am extremely triggered by financial insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I feel like there's a threat to my finances, somebody just know T-Kea is going to either be, it's going to be two things that's going to happen. Anxiety going to be so high that I'm going to be out here working, 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 or depression gonna be so bad I'm gonna just be in the bed doing nothing. Those the opposite end of but yeah, I say that because especially Jordan knows in 20 what we're in 2024, the end of December 2022, I had lost my job, and it was the most high paying job I ever had. I was making money. And so and my world came crashing down when that happened. I started dealing with this. It just also bothered me too, as far as like wondering if I was really that good. Like, am I really as talented or good? It was, but then I just realized that wasn't the place for me. It had nothing to do with my work ethic or my skills. But I say that to say I was extremely triggered when I lost that job, because I was like, even though I had I had a little bit of savings, even though they were nice enough to give me a severance package, even though I knew unemployment would eventually, but unemployment can't bear that thing barely had paid my rent at the time. It was so, even though I had, but then I was still the saving grace was I always had my consulting business, so I could not. While my consulting business was not paying me enough to pay like all of my monthly expenses, doing consulting work was able to kind of keep me afloat. So that was like, but even with that, because I didn't have as much money coming in monthly, I was always triggered. So like financial insecurity is a huge thing for me, and being financially stable or financially secure is huge for me. And that's because of what I saw growing up. You know, my mom was struggled. My dad was incarcerated most of my life. So I watched my mom pretty much be a single parent and do it all on her own with 7 kids. So I think that's where a lot of my anxiety is rooted in. And I remember when I first started experiencing, or at least when I recognized it was anxiety, I literally used to worry about everything, sun up to sundown. Now it's more managed. But it was like literally all the time, like just terrible. But yeah, that I feel like that's the one thing that comes to my mind. I'm pretty sure there might be other things, but I know anything that has to do with me feeling like I'm not gonna be able to sustain on my own. Yes.
Thank you for tuning in to part 1 of Anxiety Unfiltered. We hope that you got something out of this conversation. Be sure to tune in to the next episode for part 2. Until then, be well.